Hey guys, what's up? I'm back here. Quinn hasn't yet to um, decide if he wants to play Minecraft with me. We're only gonna stream for about 2 hours and then I'll be done. We're gonna listen to a podcast while we do, since I'm not gonna be talking much. I'll just be hopping in my thing. So this will be saved to my astrology podcasts I listen to every so often. Yeah, so I'm only gonna just, yeah, like I said, 2 hours. And that's it. I don't know if I'll just play Minecraft or it'll be something else if I get bored. I don't know. Whatever Bubby decides. So yeah, I had to test some of the audio, and the audio was kind of, I couldn't get it to work. So just don't mind like a bit. There's a bit of a robotic sound to the audio for some reason. I have no idea why. Don't ask me why. I guess it might be just some technical thing. So it's a little bit robotic, but it's manageable. So anyway, we'll listen to that real quick. So yeah.
Hey, my name is Chris Brennan, and you're listening to the Astrology Podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the astrological forecast for the entire month of June of 2023. Joining me today are astrologers Austin Kopic and Kira Taborn. Hey, welcome both of you.
Hey, Chris.
Hello.
Thanks for joining me. So we're going to start by, I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of the month ahead, just a brief preview of what we're going to be talking about here at the top of the episode. Then we're going to transition into talking about news and recent events for the first hour of the episode. And then later in the second hour, we'll get into a full detailed breakdown of the month ahead forecast for June. So people can go either to the podcast website or to the YouTube channel, and I'll put timestamps if you want to jump ahead to different segments of the show. But otherwise, let's go ahead and jump right into it by looking at the planetary alignments calendar for the month of June. All right, so here's the overview. On June 3rd, we get our first lunation of the month, which is a full moon in the sign of Sagittarius. The very next day, Mercury conjoins Uranus in the sign of Taurus. Then Venus ingresses into Leo on the 5th of June, which is important because Venus is actually going to go retrograde in that sign this summer, and therefore spend an extended period of time going through that sector of the sky. So this ingress is more important than usual because it's in some ways the early onset of
I'm
the
just arranging it so they can go inside.
Then later in the month, on the 11th, Mercury ingresses into the sign of Gemini and goes into its home sign, and Pluto retrogrades back into Capricorn after spending the past 2 months in the sign of Aquarius.
Okay, but
Then later,
you can work on it
that
too.
week, on the 17th of June, Saturn stations retrograde for the very first time in the sign of Pisces, and then it's going to retrograde back into early Pisces before stationing direct later this year. On the 20th, we get our second lunation of the month, which is a new moon in the sign of Gemini.
Okay, yeah, I'm just working on
The
this.
sun moves into Cancer on the 21st, Mercury into Cancer on the 26th, and finally at the very end of the month, Neptune stations retrograde in late Pisces on June 30th. So those are some of the main sort of major alignments that we're going to be talking about during the course of this episode, among others. But yeah, so let's go ahead and transition into the news segment of the show, and first welcome you both on. So hey Austin, hey Kira. Kira, thanks for joining us for, you've been on the podcast before, but this is your first time joining us as a co-host for the forecast episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm stoked to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. We were gonna maybe do a podcast last year, but that fell apart. So I'm excited to have you here.
Yeah, and I will at some point tap you for that again once I get around to it.
Yeah, just let me know.
And we did the Scorpio episode together of the Zodiac series along with our friend Sam Reynolds last year, and that was one of my favorite entries in the entire, I say that with much bias, of the entire Zodiac series, but it was a really good episode. I mean, oh right, I forgot. Oh yeah, usually when I have somebody and I say that, I don't have like one of the other hosts of the other sign on at the same time. Pisces was also a good episode.
Yeah, Pisces was one of my favorites. So
well, thank you. And we talked a lot about you know, the good relations between the nations of Pisces and Scorpio.
Right.
Of agreement.
And what's really funny about that is I forgot to repeat a funny anecdote that my Pisces friend mentioned that I actually mentioned in the episode with Kira in the Scorpio episode, which is a Pisces Scorpio dynamic where my Pisces friend will sometimes say if they meet a Scorpio, just to get on their nerves, they'll say it's not that serious, and that's the like Pisces thing to say to get on the nerves of a Scorpio.
Yeah, I'll I will use that. You should.
It may or may not work on me because I am a Pisces rising. So
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, it's the art of implying that.
yeah,
You know.
Yeah.
exactly.
So that secret weapon that was by Micah, the astrologer Micah. So just shout out to Micah. So, all right. So let's how have you been, Austin, since we checked in last month?
Well, so before we got on the public side of the
I'm
call,
trying to
I
figure
was
out.
describing myself as a tube of toothpaste with just a little bit left, and I was having to roll it up.
Or maybe what we can do
And I realized
instead.
that that's literally how I started my day. I realized
I have an
that the
idea.
tube of toothpaste was almost gone. I had to pick the like crusted
Mhm.
like caulk any toothpaste. So that's how I am. And
Yeah.
that's because this paired Mercury retrograde with the eclipses
Making
with
something to
Mars
Bubs?
in Cancer was a triple whammy.
Mm.
And so we had my parents were scheduled to come for the first time in years, and then had to reschedule so that they would arrive right in the middle of the Mercury retrograde. And it was absolutely worth it to see them, but it was terrible timing in general because I've had so much prep to do for Norwalk, and our cat decided to go on a death spiral.
Uh-oh.
Like rapid, unexplained health decline in the middle of that. And
Oh no.
I believe it was the day after Mercury Station Direct. A vet came. We got a vet to come to the house, and who recommended was a heroic dose. She referred to as a Hail Mary dose of prednisone. And then suddenly the cat was, this is our elder cat Bear, went from being given days to live by the previous vet to being, just kind of old. And it's got some conditions to manage, but totally fine, totally present. And so all that's, the kitty, potential kitty in mortal danger, the joy and pressure of having your parents stay in your house and you haven't seen them for years, the lots of work to do. And Kate's also got a huge project that she's working on. So it's just been, it's required a lot of toothpaste, Chris.
Yeah. Thank you for scraping yourself off the bottom of the barrel in order to come join us today, given that. I know you said you're having like a Mars transit to your Jupiter, and that was part of your like astrological correlate for that.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
so I'm in a Jupiter ruled year, and Jupiter is the ruler of the sixth, right? So 6 is where we see pets. And so for most of May, Mars was getting closer and closer to a conjunction with my Jupiter, right? As ruler of the sixth, it's a malefic, a fallen malefic trying to kill my cat. Kate had the eclipses hit Kate's sixth, so that was hard stuff for pets for her. And the kitty almost death spiral actually began within a day of the solar eclipse.
Oh no.
With the Mercury retrograde, we just had there's the parents rescheduled. Is a good example of a Mercury retrograde, and it was also the endless vet visits that disagreed with each other and gave us potentially actively incorrect information. We didn't get the right prescription until Mercury was basically direct.
Oh no.
Everything was all the big stars of May's astrology showed up.
Oh my
funny
god.
last month when we were talking all this, I was like, I just want to get to like middle end of the month. I know it'll be fine. And I found myself clinging to that during the beginning of the month.
Oh my god, he's been through a lot. So he's a Pisces, and he did the Pisces podcast. He is actually a Pisces that needs to be more Virgo like, because he's got Saturn in Pisces. I forgot his other placements, but it pretty much indicated that he's pretty much is a Pisces that must learn to manage the Mercury in him, that energy, versus me, I'm the Pisces that has Saturn that disciplines sort of that. So he's more Mercury based, I'm more Saturn based. And it's really sad. He's been through a lot in his life. Like him, joking about it too is very Mercury. I'm kind of the same way too. I just kind of make jokes. I like to joke about death too. And I know some people know that's problematic, but it's just my way of like coping. I guess you can say it's like I'm just trying to cope, y'all. So, yeah, I just wanted to say that real quick.
But that's how it happened. Things are fine. Kitty's been great for almost a week now. Got list everything done for Norwalk. Had a lovely visit with the parents. All's well that ends well. But that was, yeah, that was quite the tunnel.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
especially
can
as we
imagine.
get to the other side of eclipse season, and now we've started to have non-eclipse lunations and get out of the Mercury retrograde and everything else, and starting to transition into a new phase of the year. All right, so in terms of major news and stuff, since the last time we did a forecast about a month ago, so one of the major things was that Pluto stationed retrograde in Aquarius for the very first time since it ingressed into the Aquarius right at the beginning of the month on May 1st. And that was right in the middle of the Mercury retrograde. And I know there was at least a couple of major news stories that occurred then. One of them that was notable, and I won't spend too much time on it because I know I've talked about it a lot lately, but the AI researcher Jeffrey Hinton left Google, right? I think within a day of that Pluto station. It may have been announced on the day of the Pluto station. And he was like one of the leading AI researchers, and some people are calling him like the father of AI or something like that. And he left and then went on this like publicity tour about how he was really concerned about where things were headed, and that he was like had real concerns that this could be like a problem that was developing in the future, with all of these companies starting to pull out all the roadblocks in order to develop this technology quickly that could in some instances have negative impacts. And I thought that was really striking that it happened right on that station. And not long after that, just a few days later, a bunch of CEOs of major AI companies um, met up for a meeting at the White House. And the Vice President Kamala Harris said that they have, quote, a moral obligation to develop AI safely. And that was on Thursday, May 4th. So, just again, like right within the vicinity or the orb of that Pluto station in Aquarius. And that seems so important to me because that was the very first Pluto station in Aquarius. And there's going to be 38 of those because we're talking about.
Dude, I didn't even know that. Like, y'all, I'm so out of touch with everything right now because the only place I ever get news is from like Reddit, but a lot of the news is kind of old, I think. And even Bond's like, well, that's old. And I don't even know if it's like a huge thing, or I haven't been on Reddit today. Maybe it was for today. What? I'm so. Oh, okay. Let's just keep listening.
Pluto transiting through Aquarius over the next 20 years. So getting one preview and like paying attention to some events that were happening during that time frame seems important because it could foreshadow some events coming up in the future.
Yeah, can I plug your episode?
Sure.
Astrology and artificial intelligence, because it was really good. And yeah, I remember you guys talking about the Pluto stations, and this first one being so, it's so big. And yeah, I don't know, it's really exciting to see. I mean, it's kind of scary also, but it's exciting to see how this Pluto ingress has been so clearly, about AI. Of course, it's going to be about other things too, but yeah, it's been really interesting to watch.
Yeah, for sure. And I did that as the 400th episode because usually I'll do like a retrospective and look back into some of my favorite episodes or how different episodes went in the past 100 episodes. But for that episode, I decided to get together with Nikki Invest and talk about AI and some of the stuff that's happening and that's emerging and where it's heading. And we also tried to look into the future to look at some major alignments over the next 20 years of Pluto and Aquarius and see if this hypothetical thing of them creating artificial general intelligence, which is what most of the AI companies are trying to do right now, which is create human level versatile intelligence in machines, if that's possible, when that might happen. And we were looking at some of the different alignments that could correlate with that in the future. And I was zeroing in on like 2033 and 2040 also, especially, which is the Uranus Neptune square around that time frame.
In
Wow.
2033 is that Saturn conjunct Uranus in Gemini in a trine with Pluto in Aquarius.
Exactly. And Jupiter's also in Aquarius. It's just gone into Aquarius, and it's just like it's the tail end of Uranus in Gemini, which, I'm sure we're just going to see such an acceleration of different
Yeah.
technologies
Yeah.
and transportation
I think
because,
it'll just be
the
hard.
last time we had that was World War II, and you just imagine like how fast technology started to accelerate during that time frame, and us seeing something similar coming up over the next decade when Uranus goes into Aquarius in, just a couple of years, 2 or 3 years now. So that 2033 timeframe will just be the tail end of that. So we'll see some of the final results
Or
things coming through at that time, and I think that's a good time frames for some major technological changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And Uranus in Gemini, and also Uranus in Aquarius. Whether it rules it or not, it's very strong there. And sure, we get technology that's not specifically for killing people, but there is a lot of specifically for killing people technology that Uranus brings. Right, the previous Uranus in Gemini, or the Uranus in Gemini previous to World War II, right, Civil War, it wasn't widely used, but that's the machine gun, like a fully automatic gun, like that's when the Gatling gun was developed and deployed to some degree. There have been rifles for a while, but no machine guns until the U.S.'s Civil War, and then Uranus in Aquarius was World War One, right? Which was planes for the first time, tanks for the first time, like artillery with chemical weapons like mustard gas and all that. And then our last Uranus in Aquarius did bring everyone the internet, but you also had a lot of military technologies that were deployed for the first time in the second Gulf War.
Yeah, well, and it's also hard
Oh,
to.
one sorry, and the first atomic or the only atomic bombs to be used in a military context were used with Mars conjunct Uranus in Gemini last time.
Yeah, well, and it's hard to, as I talked about in episode 376, it's hard to disentangle this period coming up the next decade
yeah,
from
there's like
this also being the Uranus return of the United States when it goes through Gemini, and how
mm,
that's coincided with those three periods in the past of like the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and then World War II. So yeah, that's also a little nervous making, but there's that.
Oh, sorry, one more nerdy historical military fact. So the Revolutionary War, the
okay,
rife
cool.
and bigger nerds, feel free to correct me, but I believe that one of the big things in the Revolutionary War in terms of equipment was that rifling barrels was a new thing. When you rifle the barrels of a gun, the bullets are much more accurate and are much better at their job, and that was a new thing. It increases I believe it increased the range, the effective range of gunpowder weapons quite a bit, and that changed tactics. It allowed guerrilla
Perfect.
tactics to be much more effective because you could strike from a greater distance. Which, if you're trying to, shoot and run away, the greater distance you can do that, the better.
Well,
That makes sense.
uh, fitting with that is actually a news story I forgot and just remembered now as you're going on about.
You know what's funny is that he's talking about military stuff. I literally was binge watching military stuff this past week. Like I just been kind of obsessed with just kind of figuring out what's gonna go happen because I am mentally preparing for whatever war is gonna come. Just because it I have this bad feeling that my bad feeling might be connected to it in some way. Maybe it won't like start the war, like World War III is not gonna like suddenly start next month or this coming month. I don't know if it's gonna be June or July. I think July-ish, but it might be this, obviously the summer. But yeah, I just been paying attention to news, recent news things, but I know for a fact that war is gonna come. It's just not gonna come like all at once because it feels like it happens all at once. But you have to remember a lot of the stuff we learn in history and politics and all that stuff was several decades to centuries ago. So it might seem like it all happened at once, but this especially Vietnam like took a period of several years and very long years too. And so it makes sense that things aren't what they were at one point. But yeah, so I just thought it was interesting that Austin the Pisces, like me, kind of got really into military stuff or talked about it.
Major technological innovations in warfare, but also around the Pluto station, another one that I remembered and took note of at the time. I think it was around May 3rd or so. There were those that drone attack basically on the Kremlin, where there were these two drones, and there was videos of them that like dive bombed the Kremlin and were destroyed. So I don't think they did any major damage, but it was one of the first really notable uses of like drones to in an offensive way in that way on like the seat of power of like another capital of like another country in some sense. I mean, maybe there's been other stuff, but that was also a little suggestive as well, potentially not in a great way.
Yeah, well, no doubt the, probably the tactics and the thinking behind that came out of the last year in Ukraine. We talked about this. One of the major sort of military outcomes of Mars spending so long in Gemini is drones in a variety of different roles are just part of warfare now for everybody. Both sides use them again, like not just in one role, but for surveillance, for artillery spotting, for doing suicide drones, for kind of ominously and hilariously, they've equipped a lot of civilian models. They just have like a little grabber, and they'll just drop grenades on positions. You just fly your drone over and harass vertically. And so that's, it hasn't changed everything, right? It's not like a whole new ball game. It's just part of the basic. It's like part of the basic collection of forces every army is going to need from now on.
Yeah. Well, so that was the first Pluto station, and we have got approximately. Here's the list. You can actually generate a list of that in on AstroSeek, which is pretty cool. And here's all the Pluto stations that we have over the next 20
Okay.
years in Aquarius.
I was wondering if you literally counted all of them, or if
Yeah.
a machine helped you.
I got out like an ephemeris. I should have said that. I got out an ephemeris and just sat there and like counted through the next 20 years. No, I'm lazy and I use technology to my advantage, and that's what a good Aquarius rising does. So, yeah, 400 episodes, and just briefly aside, thanks everyone for listening for 400 episodes. Like, it's been an interesting journey since 2012
I
when
like
we
that one
started
better.
this. And yeah, Austin, thanks for participating, doing all these forecasts with me. We're about to hit the 8-year anniversary, the Venus retrograde anniversary of starting that this summer. And Kira, you've also been like a long time listener and fan and participant of the podcast, as well as a fellow podcaster yourself. So yeah, it's been interesting hitting that milestone.
Yeah, congrats to you. It's wild. I mean, I've mentioned it before when I've been on the podcast, but I think I started listening in like 2014, and yeah, it's crazy that that was 9 years ago, and now I'm on the podcast. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
congrats on 400 plus.
Thank you. And I know, so Kira, you had mentioned also there was another news story that was happening around the time of the Pluto station, which was the writer's strike happened, and you had something you thought that was tied into as well.
Yeah, I was thinking, writers are obviously symbolized by Mercury, and we had that station so close to Uranus, and thinking about all the strikes we've seen going on around the world over the past couple years, they've been closely tied to the Saturn-Uranus squares. And so I figured that this Mercury retrograde station with Uranus is probably also tied to the writer's strike. And Austin had pointed out, like, it's happening in this Venus ruled sign, and we're talking about creative industries. So yeah, I'm curious to see what happens when Mercury finally clears that shadow and makes that conjunction with Uranus.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And there's another the other piece about it is, and I haven't studied this exhaustively, but from what I've heard about the writers' strike, one of the conditions that the writers are pushing for is that their studios, the employers, don't use AI, or promise not to use AI to replace writer labor. And so Mercury's not exactly square Pluto, but it's in a squared sign, right? They're angular relative to each other, and Mercury's direct station was pretty close, like middle of the first decan of Taurus, right? Pluto in the first decan of Aquarius. and just I sincerely doubt that there's ever been a large scale negotiation in an industry where AI was one of the key conditions. So that just kind of ties. It shows you like Pluto tying in now to that, like to what's been going on in the fixed signs, right? That Uranus and Taurus and labor has been such a consistent theme, but now we have the Pluto and Aquarius theme, right?
Yeah, that's such a
Yeah.
good point.
Yeah, and just major transformations and major like inevitable transformations, because that's, probably just the tip of the iceberg of many other industries that are going through similar things right now and having similar tensions in terms of all of a sudden this technology is being implemented and threatens like a lot of different jobs and stuff, and a lot of different jobs and careers and fields are going to change as a result of that.
Right. And
Yeah.
in a
Mm.
way, like, and it's an uncertain threat. Maybe it threatens this, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it does threaten it, but not for 20 years. Maybe it threatens it next year. Maybe they never, maybe it can never do that. Right. It's almost more ominous to say they might be coming for you than they're definitely coming for you.
Okay, so interesting note. This is probably because you're preparing for retrograde Pluto. We're gonna go back into Capricorn in like a week, I think, or 2 weeks. I thought it was gonna go into Capricorn at the 11th, but it's actually be sooner than that. So like less, like probably about a week or less than that. I've honestly really enjoyed Pluto and Aquarius. The time period had. I feel a lot more like letting go of a lot of things. I've also really changed my mind on how I view just groups, people, humanity, all that and jazz. One of the things I did learn through my Saturn return, because I had Saturn Aquarius, is that I shouldn't really worry so much about what people think about me if I always have good intentions. I think that's like the big baseline of me to understand, because I think I'm always going in thinking I'm going to offend someone, or I have to be quiet because I might upset someone. Yes, there's always a chance that you might upset someone. That's always a given. But I think if you go in with good intentions and just accept criticism where it is, if, maybe the other person's just not sure, then you can explain yourself and try to further educate yourself. People criticizing you is not an attack. People who do that unhinged usually are very insecure and are threatened by you in some way. Unfortunately, I do attract a lot of people that feel threatened by me, especially from Sagittarius's. And I know it's because of I had my little opposition year recently. So I noticed this sort of like shift in my perspective on Sagittarius folks. Now, I'm not saying every Sagittarius person I ever met never got along with. That's not actually true. There's been plenty of Sagittarius people I respect. Like one of my favorite artists, Nicki Minaj. I really like her. I just like the idea of Sagittarius in general. But I can understand why some people, but usually Sagittarius, like the bad ones, or the ones, they tend to be threatened by those who, see through them, because Sagittarius love to be the teacher. They love to teach people. They're not much of a learner like Gemini. Gemini likes to study and research just as much as, like Sagittarius does. But Sagittarius always acts like they know it all. And so that's something Sagittarius got to be really careful about, because you can really get up and in your head about things. So what I'm trying to do right now is trying to get all this to like freaking, but I might have to make a hole somehow, because what I'm trying to do is trying to make it so that way they can come in here in between. So it's really not working the way I want it to. I thought I had an idea, but it didn't. But anyway, let's just go.
Yeah, because how do you plan?
Right.
Who knows?
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, good to keep paying attention to stuff in the early phases of this, since the early phases of a transit sometimes give that like preview or that little inkling of things to come. So we'll have to pay attention to that.
Yeah, just on that real quick, Chris. I
Mhm,
feel like like there's a little when you have a planet that does a toe dip ingress and
mhm.
comes in, just this is just for 2 months and then pops back into the previous sign, but with an "I'll be back." Right? It's sort of like I'm just gonna leave this here, right? And you
Right.
can talk about this, right? You're like, oh, we need to do this ethically and safety. This could go really wrong. It's just enough of a a potential threat that it's you got to think about it, but it's not fully formed. It's hard to articulate a full response. But I'm just going to leave this here, and I'll be back in 6 months, and
That's
we'll
really
talk
funny.
again. Like
Well,
that's exactly the feeling of this, and that's exactly the timing of the ingress and egress.
that's really funny because that's like the exact line of that Arnold Schwarzenegger
Yeah.
became famous for in like the Terminator, and he looks around and he just says, "I'll be back," and that is the ominous thing. And then he like a few minutes later crashes his car through the police station and starts killing everyone.
I didn't know that. I never seen it.
Never seen the Terminator? Oh
I
man.
haven't seen a lot of movies, but that
Okay.
line makes even more sense now.
I
I
w-
love that.
I would
Yeah.
I would just watch Terminator 2, and if you like that, watch the first one. Terminator 2 is widely regarded as the best. It's a very entertaining movie, if nothing else.
Cool.
But what's interesting,
Hold on. We can't transition from there really quickly. That's true, and Terminator 2 is the same as 1, but there's a big twist in Terminator 2 that you can't actually understand properly unless you watch Terminator 1. So I
Okay.
recommend still watching 1 in order to. All right, now make your transition, Oscar.
I was just gonna say, it's interesting because Pluto in Aquarius is bringing up all of the horror stories we have about the future, that we told, that some of which, like Terminator, or some of which were told during previous Saturn and Aquarius periods. But Terminator, for those of you who have seen it, there might be some spoilers. They've been out for 35 and 40 years. Um,
Don't
but
worry
when
about it,
people
man.
talk about Skynet, like the apocalypse to be avoided in Terminator is literally AI takes over. And we have that in a dozen other franchises and novels.
It
And so
becomes like sentient and then recognizes humanity as an enemy, as a threat, and then decides to destroy humanity.
right, or the Matrix, where same thing happens, but decides that humanity would make good batteries. And so what's interesting is, in none of those timelines do we have, um, is AI developed while everybody has stories about what will happen if AI is developed. And so, we're maybe they changed the timeline by freaking everybody out. No, but it's bringing up all of this, and it's like, okay, were these just stories, or are these actually like legitimate things to worry about? But the Aquarius and future horror, like what could go wrong? And it's interesting because it's uh, Aquarius, like Capricorn, is Saturn ruled, but in a very different way. And so it's a fear of order, just like with Pluto and Capricorn. It's the how should we say, like the cruel, like
Mm.
pen or cage or prison of order. And with Capricorn, there's a lot of looking to the past. But with Pluto in Aquarius, it's imagining a new order, right? Like a ordered by inhuman intelligence, and us being, basically stuck and either used or eliminated, or yeah, whatever, by this order which might develop, right? But from an intelligence not our own. Whereas Pluto and Capricorn seem to be more um, looking with regret and horror at what we've all done to ourselves and each other, right? But
In the
with
world.
yeah, in the world. But with Pluto in Capricorn, Aquarius, it's like something else is going to come in and do it to us. We have that like outsider feeling. I wonder if
Yeah, that,
aliens. I wonder if Pluto and Aquarius will take some of the alien stuff, and like ramp it up, or fully adrenalize it. People
Mhm.
will get afraid of that form of other intelligence doing something Pluto to us.
yeah.
Especially from the sky.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, and that was the interesting thing. Somebody made a comment because I made a comment in the AI episode that the fear that people have about AI is that we'll create another sentient, essentially like alien race of people on Earth that happen to be smarter or more powerful than us. And if they treat us like we treat other sentient entities on Earth, then like humans might be in bad shape. And I thought that somebody made a comment when I said that we'll create another one. They said that there's already other sentient, beings on Earth, but we just often don't treat them well, or we don't treat them as if they have the same, level of sentience as we do, but then what happens on the flip side if we create something that has the same attitude or towards us in some way is the concern.
Yeah, are either of you familiar with the dark forest hypothesis?
Oh
I've
yeah.
come across it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the dark forest, the idea is that the universe is
Love
quiet
that
and
he
we
brought
don't
that up.
see signs of life because any civilization smart enough to be able to send signals and see what's going on in the universe realizes that the universe is full of other civilizations that are threatened and know that that it's a forest at night where things are quiet because there are predators, and so other civilizations are quiet because they don't want to reveal their location and and get space nuked or whatever. And there's some really good fiction that has proceeded from that, like the
It's like
three body
Wakanda
problem.
almost. Black Panther, like
Right.
how they just like are hidden.
Yeah, right. And right, like so. Yeah, and if you live in the forest and there you have any predators, uh, you know that concealment is probably your best defense. And so the universe is quiet because everyone knows to hide.
Right. Whereas humanity is like young enough and stupid enough right now that we're just like shooting off fireworks and making loud sounds and attracting as much attention as possible to us.
Right. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And so in the three body problem, it begins close to our timeline where we send out our stupid messages. We're like, we know math and we can make music, and we get one response ever, which is basically decodes to I'm a pacifist. Most of my people are not. Do not cease broadcasting and do not respond. Do not answer me. Do not answer this. Do not answer this.
Nice. Good
Yep.
times.
But like full Pluto and Aquarius feels right.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm
Yeah.
I'm really curious to see if we're going to get some concrete alien proof during this transit.
Yeah, I mean, even just, we're so close, even if biological life, because there's other places in our solar system where, the ingredients are like possible, that's legitimately something that could be discovered in the next 20 years. And that would be an interesting facet of the transit as well, and would be game changing scientifically and theologically and all sorts of other things if, even if just microbial life was found on another planet in our solar system.
Yeah. With so Aquarius in the tarot is usually synced up with the star card, right? Which
Mhm.
is this woman receiving light and inspiration from the night sky above, and then sort of pouring it out into a little pool at her feet. But if we bring Pluto into that, like the underworld is that night sky, right? Like the infernal realms, the place of uh yeah, the like source of terror and potentially death is above rather than below. The unknown, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, all right. So I
Mhm.
didn't mean to go on a whole other tangent about AI for like yet another month in a row, and I apologize to people that are not into that.
We're talking about aliens, Chris.
That's true. We're talking about aliens now, so that's better. That's better. All right, let's transition into another news story. Another thing that happened, not AI
Okay, but
related, was Prince
yeah, I'm
Charles
trying to
became King Charles, and had
I'm just trying to figure out how to
his
arrange this so that
inauguration.
villagers can come in and
Was
out.
coronated on May 6, 2023, and I am not usually like a major royal watcher, but I was interested in this only because I'd used his chart as an example before because he was born with Leo rising and the sun in Scorpio in the fourth whole sign house.
Mhm.
And for so much of
Mhm.
his life, because he was born in 1948, so he's like an old man now. For so much of his life, it was spent sort of like waiting, because his mother lived to be super, super old and was like the queen. She was the longest reigning, I think, monarch in history, or pretty close.
Mhm.
And so there was a huge part of his life that was sort of like spent waiting around to see if like he would become king at some point, or even if he would die never having become king because his mother ended up like outliving him or something. And so that finally, we've learned the final part of that story, which is that didn't happen, and his mother passed away last fall. And interestingly, the night right before he was coronated as king in May, there was that Scorpio lunar eclipse, and that occurred right in his fourth house. So I thought that was really interesting and really fitting just because of that fourth house placement, and how, on the one hand, it was providing some culmination and some end to that story in terms of his long wait to become king and the question of whether he would become king, as well as, the other things associated with that, just in terms of his family and his inheritance and all those other things surrounding it. So interesting little correlation there.
Yeah, well, if you pop back to the chart for a second, was that his chart you had up real quick?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and so this is literally his nodal return. And he was born more or less on an eclipse himself. Like he was born, like a day and a half before a lunar eclipse, and the moon is with the north node. Ooh, so it's real close. It's right at the edge of being a legitimate or being a visible eclipse, but like sun and moon with the nodes in Taurus and Scorpio, just like what happened a few weeks ago.
Yeah. Well,
Like
well
that's
look.
such a like a doubling down on the natal signature.
Well, and if you look at in the bottom right, it shows of my chart layout using solar fire. It shows the preceding lunar phases, and the two eclipses that preceded his birth were an eclipse in Scorpio and an eclipse in Aries, and that's literally what we just had. We just had an eclipse in Scorpio and eclipse in Aries, like right around the time of his coronation. So that's a real striking sort of natal transit correlation there, and it's just a reminder of, that's one of those oldest principles in astrology, especially in the Mesopotamian astrological tradition that goes back to at least 2000 BCE, is just major stuff happens under eclipses, and especially there are changes of rulers, of like kings and queens, and kings and queens die or rise to power around the time of eclipses. And it's weird that even in this day in 2023, that's still happening, and we still have things like that happening in really striking ways.
Yeah, it's very House of the Dragon, right? The and
Mm-hmm.
I had a few other thoughts on that. Again, I'm not much of a royal watcher, but that it speaks to the whatever the Babylonian omen watcher in me to see people taking on thrones and what are the sun and the moon doing. And so that's interesting with the it being on a lunar eclipse on the south node that he in Scorpio that he took the crown, because with the south node we often have absence or loss or having to let go, and then there were a lot of unhappy planets in water signs during that time, and so it's interesting because the star of the show is the queen's absence.
Mm.
Like her absence is probably much bigger than his presence. Um, and so it also made me want, I was thinking about like just from an electional point of view. So from a transit point of view, that's triggering his sun and moon and all that. That makes sense. That would be around the time that he would be coronated. But then,
Mm-hmm.
electional astrology is when do we schedule the thing that's going to happen anyway? We could pick a Tuesday or a Wednesday, right? And I was just thinking about, what is it? What does that say that it was done on that lunar eclipse on the south node? And it seems less about it. It seems so. If the sun is the figurehead themselves, the one wearing the crown. I was thinking about the moon as speaking to the dynasty itself, like literally the family that has power. In this case, the Windsors, and I don't know. If I were tending to the Windsor dynasty, I would not do it on a lunar eclipse with the moon in fall with its ruler falling. That seems not great. That seems to speak for a dissolution or a moving towards dissolution for the dynasty itself. Less about him and more about like what it says about where that family's going.
Mm. Yeah.
He
And
gets some interesting transits this year too. Uranus coming for his sun and chart ruler. see how
pull
that
the
goes.
chart again. Oh yeah, so Uranus will get up to like 22, 23 for the first.
23, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so that'll oppose his sun,
Okay.
and you know the eclipses have been bouncing back and forth between Taurus and Scorpio for a little while now, and there was a set last year shortly after Queen Elizabeth died, and then there was some preceding it. So it's just kind of notable how it reminds me that sometimes eclipses, because they happen in the same pair of signs for like a year and a half, sometimes precede or like foreshadow events and build up to them, as well as sometimes their culmination. But yeah, that's a really interesting point about the Uranus transit to the sun as well.
Yeah,
It'd be an interesting year.
for sure.
This was the year that was probably always going to happen, but kept not happening.
Yeah, it kept being put off or extended, and then it finally came. So, and let's see, that reminded me of I was doing some research on the Mesopotamian tradition and just like seeing that weird correlation of a king being coronated at the time of an eclipse reminded me of in the Mesopotamian tradition, they had this. It was actually the longest running scientific program in history, and we refer to it now as the Astronomical Diaries, where the ancient astrologers and sky watchers in Mesopotamia, starting around 750 BCE, they set up this program of going out every night and observing the stars in the sky, and then writing down any of the alignments of what they witnessed, as well as any astrological omens or anything that was happening. And they would also sometimes write down things that were correlating on Earth at the time, like the prices of commodities, basically like tracking the markets to a certain extent. They would note the level of the Euphrates River, and they would also sometimes note important political events that happened at the time. And one of them that's really fascinating that they actually noted way back in the 4th century is we have this tablet that was um, recovered, that's been rediscovered. It's in the British Museum, but it's a little clay tablet that has writing on it in the wedge-shaped language of cuneiform. And on this tablet, it notes an eclipse that took place recently on September 20th, 331 BCE. And then one of the things that it records is Alexander of Macedon, or Alexander the Great, he's sometimes called, defeating Darius, the prince of, or the king of Persia at the time, in the Battle of Gaugamela on October 1st, 331 BCE. And the significance of that was basically this was Alexander the Great defeating the Persian king and essentially setting himself up as the new king across Mesopotamia and the Middle East at the time.
Yeah, that
So,
was the decisive battle, right? There were several important battles, but that was the decisive battle, and Darius was forced to flee and was basically in exile in his own country, being chased around by the Macedonians.
right. Yeah. So, and the tablet, it records an eclipse occurred. There's an amazing article on this. There's many articles you can find, but there's one on livius.org that's titled Astronomical Diaries, where it talks about the diaries and the things that they record. But it talks about the record that the astrologer who wrote this tablet made. It says on the 24th in the morning, the king of the world, parentheses Alexander, erected his standard and attacked. Opposite each other, they fought, and a heavy defeat of the troops of the king, in parentheses Darius, Alexander inflicted. The king Darius, his troops deserted him, and to their cities they went. They fled to the east. And it also notes the relevant things from the relevant omens from the compilation series, the Enuma Anu and Lil at the time, that was relevant to the specific eclipse that had just occurred right before that. And it gave the interpretation from the Enuma Anu and Lil, which said the significance, it says, if either on the 13th or 14th the moon is dark, the watch passes and it is dark, his features are dark like lapis lazuli, He's obscured until his midpoint. The west quadrant as it is covered, the west wind blew, the sky is dark, his light is covered. So it's describing this specific type of eclipse. And then it says, if this happens, the significance is the son of the king will become purified for the throne, but will not take the throne. An intruder will come with the princes of the west. For 8 years he will exercise kingship. He will conquer the enemy army. There will be abundance and riches on his path. He will continually pursue his enemies, and his luck will not run out. So it mentions a specific period of 8 years, and what's crazy about that is that after Alexander conquered Mesopotamia and won this battle, he actually did reign for 8 years before he eventually went over and fought in wars all the way to the westernmost portions of India, and then eventually was forced to turn back. He went back to Babylon and then promptly died, basically, and his reign ended under mysterious circumstances 8 years later. So not only did the canonical series make an accurate prediction about his reign ahead of time, but there were just astrologers that were there witnessing it and writing down what was happening at the time. And it just reminded me, I wanted to mention this because that's part of what we're doing here, and that's part of the tradition that we're tied into when we do these forecast episodes. We spend the first hour basically reflecting on recent events that we've seen and noting some of the important astrological correlations that we noticed at the time, and adding that to our sort of repository of collected things. And then we move on to talking about the forecast that's coming up in the month ahead. It's part of building up that sort of literary tradition of empirical observations of astrological movements in the sky and what they correlate with event-wise on Earth. And that's been going on for over 4,000 years now. But in that way, doing some of these forecast episodes, these are kind of like art tablets that we're recovering or we're recording in our time period.
That's some beautiful Mercury Saturn conjunction stuff, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you.
Honestly.
Yeah. All right. So other news. Do you guys have any other news or events you wanted to mention? No? Okay. Let's see.
Really. I've been very distracted.
Yeah, you've had a lot going on, but are starting to come out of that period. A lot of Mercury retrograde stuff.
I mean, I have like I was telling you
Sorry.
both earlier. This was a full-on cliche Mercury retrograde. In addition to the big stuff, there was lots of little stuff. There were 3 different instances where there was difficulty getting an important package from the post office, and multiple seemingly
I don't mean to hit them.
unnecessary
They're
steps
just in my way.
taken, over and over and over
Oh,
again.
crap.
Just classic stuff.
Nice. Did you have any Mercury retrograde things, Kira?
Yeah, I have some cute Mercury retrograde. Mercury rules my 7th and my 10th, or sorry, my 7th and my 4th house. And it's been retrograde it was retrograde in my 3rd. And I just, every retrograde without fail, I'm reunited with someone from my past, especially the Mercurials. I've dated a lot of Mercurials that I'm so close with. So one funny thing that happened, well, one, I went on a date for the first time forever, and my business partner has the same name as this guy that I went on a date with, and they're both Virgos, and just like things like that. They both have Venus in Libra. So that's one thing that happened, and I kept accidentally like texting the other because they have the same name. And then another fun one was I was trying to book an Airbnb in Brooklyn, and
Make this a
the ones I kept trying to request kept falling through. And it's always third time's a charm with Mercury retrograde, at least in my experience. So I knew the third one was probably going to happen, and it did. And it ended up being like directly across the street from one of my really good friends in Brooklyn, who's one of those Virgo stelliums.
Yeah, making this school right now.
7th house. So yeah, I just got to see a lot of my mercurial friends.
Buggies
and
out there.
friends in general. Ran into people on the street walking around Brooklyn.
He's so cute.
So yeah, I enjoy that part of Mercury retrograde as someone who has a Mercury ruled 7th house. It's always like I get to see people from my past, and it's always kind of fun.
Yeah, I love that backward looking notion to Mercury retrograde because usually the planets move forward in the signs of the zodiac and the degrees, but then when they start moving backwards, it's not just it's really can be a process of not just revisiting things from the past, but also like looking back and reflecting on the past in very tangible ways. But sometimes it's not until you're in the midst of that and you're experiencing that you truly understand what that means.
Yeah. Yeah,
It,
I bet the other Jupiter ruled people out there have similar things with Mercury ruling the seventh and just like, oh, here's someone from, I went to school with 10 years ago or whatever, someone I used to work with. Like, just people keep coming back. Yeah.
Yeah. I had that as well with my Mercury retrograde story, which it was a retrograde through my fourth house because it was in Taurus, and around the time of the towards the end of the retrograde and around the time of the direct station, I had a visit with like a family visit. So there was like a fourth house thing of meeting up with my mom for the first time in a year. But also, I had this sudden strong urge to go back and visit the city I grew up in, and both visit my old house where I grew up, but also to sort of like drive around my old neighborhood. And it was a lot of like going back and revisiting and remembering things that I'd forgot about what seems like a different lifetime, like 20 years ago.
That was so crazy because I was kind of going through that as well, sort of like remembering past things. Like there's certain traumas not like traumas, but certain like events. I'm like, whoa, now to remember that. And I just am kind of like floored by that because it is not something I was expecting to be. Bubby trapped me in here. Bubby, why'd you trap me in here? I'm trying to make a school. Okay. He's so funny. And so like so I was gonna do this where they're learning how to do it in here. And then they have a place to study. So here they're gonna like practice targeting right here. They can get it to work. Wait. Oh, sorry, I'm not
And there
playing
was
it.
this real looking back to the past feeling. And I didn't realize until I was almost done that like Mercury was retrograde and stationing in my fourth house. And I thought that was really striking. It's also kind of striking because I noticed, it was retrograde in my fourth house, but that's also my quadrant third house. And the third house is like your neighborhood. And I could kind of see the overlap of both of those, of the fourth house significations as well as the third. And I was thinking about that a lot this month because with Ben Dyke's new translation of Firmicus Maternus that I was reading through, it was really evident that Firmicus is sort of wrestling with and is trying to reconcile the whole sign house placements and the degree based house placements at the same time. And he has this desire to use both, just like Rhetorius did. And you can see him referring to this periodically throughout the text. And I thought it was interesting having like a real embodied experience of both as I was doing that this month with that Mercury station in Taurus.
I have that too, actually, now that I think about it. Well, it's not the same, but Mercury ruling the fourth. I guess Mercury, you have a
So it looks like they're
Gemini
studying and
as
stuff.
well, then, right?
Right.
Because yeah, I went back home too and went to go visit my family and my hometown, and yeah, lots of that with Mercury retrograde as well.
Nice.
my primary movement through the past was while I wasn't dealing with drama in the present, was going line by line through a particular section of Firmicus in preparation for a presentation at NORWAC and a couple other projects. And so, whenever I could get away and concentrate, it was literally just, reading a 1600-year-old text and like line by line trying to extract all of the conditions under which we get this delineation and thinking about that and sort of installing a Firmicus bot in my brain. And what's funny is that I didn't plan to do that project once Ben's new translation had come out. It's just Firmicus time apparently.
Yeah. Well, and it was Firmicus Time, and then there was somebody that released a podcast independently on Firmicus Maternus on a different podcast um, that didn't know it was like around the same time that Ben's translation came out, and they didn't realize it was just independent. It just reminded me that sometimes I think it's tied in with whatever Firmicus's birth chart is, which we don't have. It must have been getting activated recently because he was just coming up in all sorts of different ways. In the same way, in like February, for example, Valens was coming up a lot, um, or which was part of that was tied in with his anthology. Me publishing that in October, right on that
That's
eclipse
like
in
the training
Scorpio,
center.
which is very close to
Maybe we
his
can make
sun.
this into something
But
else.
sometimes people's birth charts live on for
Eh.
like centuries and centuries afterwards, and when their memory comes up, it's their chart like getting activated over again.
Yeah, it seems like Firmicus is having a transit, getting having something's popping because that's three or four things that are all Firmicus centric that aren't tied together, like they could have happened at different times.
Yeah, for sure. And then one other that was actually related to that in an indirect way that I meant to mention that was really notable and kind of important in our community was there was an astrologer named Ellen Black who passed away on May 10th, not long after the Scorpio eclipse. And she was one of the founders of Project Hindsight, actually. She was Robert Schmidt's wife, and he was the principal translator. But she was the one actually in the 1980s that got into astrology first and got a consultation with an astrologer and was so impressed by it that she started encouraging Schmidt to look into it and to take it seriously. And I was told by a friend who knew them, Livia Shankin, in the past week, just a few days ago, that she said that one of the first things they did after she got a consultation was that they got a translation of Firmicus Maternus that existed, Bram's translation that was done in the 1970s, and read it, and that Schmidt read the translation, Livia said, and said, I could do a better job of translating this, and that was somehow connected to their start and what would eventually become the start of Project Hindsight, because by that point they were already doing a translation project for ancient mathematical texts, which was the first version of Project Hindsight in the 1980s. But then in 1992 and 1993, they got together with Robert Hand and Robert Zoller and founded the Astrological Project to go back and translate
We're
and
gonna put
recover
a
ancient
design at the top.
astrological
We're just
texts,
gonna
which has
cover
then
this all up.
reshaped the astrological community over the past 30 years in many notable ways. So I just wanted to mention her and recognize her because that was a major notable thing that happened this month. All
Yeah,
right.
very very butterfly effect with that story, right? Like Ellen gets a reading, and then oh, it's cool, and then they buy Firmicus, and what what a difficult to predict series string of events, especially without astrology. The little, like the one decision that then ends up, it's very much the grain of sand that creates the avalanche 40 years later.
Yeah, well, no, it's reminiscent also of what sometimes happens in eclipses, like we were talking about last month, whereas sometimes you'll have an eclipse in a notable part of your chart, and something important will happen, but you won't recognize its significance until later. And sometimes it's like hidden or obscured what the notable event was that happens. Like sometimes it's obvious, and you get like
Mm-hmm.
Charles being coronated or something like that, which is very public and very obvious. But other times, similarly significant events happen in our lives that coincide with eclipses, but we don't know until later, until retrospect, until looking back, what the significance of that was.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So I think that was all of the major news stories that I meant to mention, and we're getting towards the end of our first hour here. Before we transition into talking about the forecast for June, I did want to mention our sponsor, which is the website and the astrology software program known as Archetypal Explorer at archetypalexplorer.com. So, Archetypal Explorer is a web based astrology program which is built for astrology enthusiasts. And it's really awesome because it provides astrological tools such as a horoscope chart, as well as visual transit timelines and calendars
I
that you
really
can
should get
use
on
to
top of that. I'm
actually
so lazy.
look at the transits that are coming up,
Too much
both
going on.
in terms of your personal life and in terms of world events in general. So here's a screenshot I took earlier today that I'm actually going to be using during our forecast of the type of transit timeline that you can get through Archetypal Explorer, where it shows the entire month ahead or year ahead or whatever time frame you want, and it plots the transits of the planets in a graph that goes up the closer the aspect gets to going exact, and then as the aspect recedes and moves
Mhm.
away, the graph goes downwards, so that you can really visualize
Yeah.
in a more like almost like three-dimensional sense the transits
Mm-hmm.
and see them not just as a singular
Okay, you can
event
have a
or
snack.
point, that occurs on a certain date of the calendar, but
Oh,
instead
buddy.
as this process, this overlapping process of different transits sort of coming into being or coming into intensity and passing out of that. So,
And just
with our
making like
people exploring, we can
designs
set
and
it up
stuff.
to
Nothing
also
crazy.
give you interpretations of each of the transits
Mm-hmm.
from two different exclusive interpretation books, one of which was written by Richard
Okay.
Tarnas and draws on his approach to astrology,
Mm-hmm.
inspired by his book Cosmos and Psyche. And you
Mm-hmm.
can get interpretations of some of these transits, where they'll give you like a positive side of that or a positive interpretation of that, as well as a more negative or
I'm
what
making
the
like a design
challenges
on the
are that
wall.
come from that sort of transit, which is super useful if you're trying to understand what the transits mean for you that
Okay.
are coming up in the near future. Other features of the program are also a calendar, which you can use to schedule dates and use it for electional purposes for planning different things. And also, there's a separate interpretation text drawn on the book The Archetypal Universe by Ren Butler that gives you a second set of interpretations besides Tarnis's interpretations if you would like more. So it's a super useful program, and it's one that I use constantly and that you'll see all the time. I used it, for example, in the AI episode in order to look at some of the outer planets coming up over the next 20 years. And that's how Nick and I zeroed in on some of those time frames like 2033 and 2040 because of the ability to see overlapping transits rather than
I'm
just
not gonna let
singular
you do
ones in
it because
isolation. So that's a super useful
yeah,
program.
yeah, I
It's
can't.
membership
Yeah.
based, so you can get a free 7-day trial just to try it out if you'd like at
I mean, you could try, but
archetypalsword.com.
it's not gonna work. So
So
I'm
I'd
not gonna
recommend
let you
checking
do
it out
it.
and
I can change.
thank them for
Nope,
sponsoring this
already.
episode.
Yep.
All right.
He can't
So
actually. I turned off that because I knew he would try to do that. He likes to blow up
June,
stuff, mess up
and
servers. So
talking about the
he
astrology
doesn't
of
realize that
start,
actually ruins everything.
to give
So
sort of the overview of that, here's the alignments calendar image that just shows some of the major ingresses and stations and lunations that we're going to be talking about. But let me put up the chart for the
I
first
can't
of the
really
month
tell
so
where to
that
put
we can
everything.
frame where the planets are and where they're going to be as we begin the month. So I forgot to say that today we're recording this on May 21st, 2023. We started, I think, about 1:40 p.m. in Denver, Colorado. So here's the chart for June
Oh wow, that's
1st
quite a
that
while.
shows some of the astrological alignments that we start the month out with. So let's see, where should we start? We see Pluto is still barely in Aquarius, but it's getting ready to retrograde back into Capricorn. We see Jupiter is now 3 degrees into Taurus. Mercury has returned just about back to its station degree. I think it's back to like 16 degrees of Taurus at the start of the month, which is not super far from where it went retrograde several weeks ago. The sun is making its way through Gemini. Mars is already 7 degrees into Leo. So it's starting to finally move out of that square with Jupiter and that opposition with Pluto, which is so exact right now here at the end of May. And we have our first lunation of the month forming on the 3rd, which is going to be that full moon in Sagittarius, which is the second non-eclipse lunation after we start to get caught up with eclipse season here. So where should we start? What's catching your eye? What are the things that are standing out to you in terms of in terms of the opening of the month?
Oh, let's see. I mean, so one thing worth saying is that June has a lot less change than April and May. We've got
Okay. Whew.
Jupiter in a new sign by the time June begins. Mars is going to be in the same sign all month. Once Venus ingresses into Leo early in the month, in Leo the whole month. Mercury finishes up in spends the first half of June finishing up in Taurus and then is in Gemini. And there aren't any other, and then Pluto goes back to Capricorn. But we've had kind of a turbulent, lots of big important changes over the last few months, like April or end of March, beginning of April, right? We got the like Pluto's in a new sign for the first time in 15 years. Saturn's changing signs, and then Jupiter changed signs, and oh, it's an eclipses and it's Mercury retrograde, and the last 2 months of just there's been a lot going on, and it's not that nothing happens in June, but we don't have the same level of big pieces being rearranged. Like
That's
the
true.
big pieces are going to, other than Pluto going back into Capricorn, the big pieces are just where they are in June, and they're going to be there for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely the vibe that I've been feeling going into June as well. It's like we finally get some time to digest everything from the past couple months and move into a period of like adjustment. There's a lot of like squares happening, but yeah, there's not these like big changes like we've been having in April and May.
Yeah, I'm so excited for that is literally the plan, is just get to June and then pause
Veg
for a
out.
second.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
same.
I was getting worried.
Oxidate myself.
Yeah, especially for
Yeah.
like signs getting out of eclipse season and having things settle down again from the major changes and the
Sorry,
major
Bubs. I'm
periodic
trying to
changes
get. I'm
being
getting
thrown
cold.
up in the air, which was both sort of side effect or direct effect of the eclipses that happened in Aries and Scorpio, but also of the Mercury retrograde conjunct
Let's
Uranus
see.
in Taurus, and how that was sort of like amplifying the sort of disruptive quality of that time. So we get a bit of a break from that here this month, but this month is also setting up for some other major changes that are coming this summer with the Venus retrograde in Leo, especially once Venus changes signs and moves into Leo, because it's going to spend so much time there over the next several months. But especially starting around by mid month, around June 19th, Venus actually moves into its shadow phase because it's going to pass over the degree that it will later retrograde back to later during the course of the retrograde period, where it's when it stations direct there on September 3rd. So the pre-retrograde shadow phase begins on June 19th, and like I said, the sort of precursor even to that, which is the ingress of Venus into a new sign when it moves into Leo, is going to take place on the 5th of June. So already at that point, we start to get a shift and we start to get the build up to something in the Leo sectors of all of our charts.
Yeah, and that's we have two things like early June, right? Which is
I've been very.
we get a full moon pretty early, and then we get Venus's ingress into Leo just I believe 2 days after that. And both of those are both events involving fire signs. There's it's there's so much Venus in Leo to talk about, and we will be taking 4 or 5 months to talk about all of the Venus and Leo things. But it is interesting that we get started like again just before the ingress we have a full moon in Sagittarius, which is ruled by Jupiter in a Venus ruled sign. And when we were talking
Yeah,
about
just
this
like that,
earlier, when you
maybe.
look at a lot of what's going on this month, the a lot of the planets end up answering to Venus, right? We have Mercury still in Taurus for the first half of the month, looking to Venus for direction. Jupiter is in Taurus now and will be for a year, looking to Venus for direction. Saturn is in the sign of Venus's exaltation and looks to Jupiter for direction, which is in Venus's sign. And so there's just a lot that's kind of coming back to Venus and what Venus has planned.
Yeah. And Venus is getting ready to start looking backwards into the past and bringing up things from the past in order to set a more solid foundation for the future. And so for some people, it'll be looking back and digging up things from the past, but for others, it will be that important turning point that sometimes happens with Venus retrogrades of setting a new foundation for the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like some people are really tied into that Venus retrograde cycle, and important events are pretty common when those take place.
Yeah. Well, and so even though we have the ingress this month, it's going to be another 6 weeks until we have 6 or 7 weeks until Venus turns retro, and so we've got like we've got an entryway, right? Or we have the road to the retro, and sometimes those are smoother than they should be, and they sneak up on you. But this time, as soon as Venus enters Leo, Mars is right there. And it looks like Venus is chasing Mars. And it looks like, Venus is going to overtake Mars, but Venus keeps slowing down and slowing down and slowing down and doesn't quite make conjunction. But we have the two moving increasingly as a pair all this month and for the first half of July. And so in Venus Mars conjunctions are, as you say, not subtle. They're the polite way to put it is inordinately passionate.
Sorry.
And then we have this almost
This is probably too complicated. I just realized. I'm like,
which is again a sign not
we'll probably do a different design on the other
not
side because
famous
it's too
for its
complicated.
subtlety, or tact or lack of drama.
For the
Yeah.
record, Venus and Mars finally do come together in Aquarius early next year in February.
Oh.
But yeah, we have I think kind of a glaring lack of Venus Mars aspects this year. We had our final one already. We had only have three exact aspects this year, and the last one was a sextile between Venus and Gemini, Mars and Gemini, and Venus in Aries. So yeah, it's this weird tension with them, Venus kind of chasing Mars through Leo and then having to stop and go backwards, and they don't get to meet up again until February.
Right. So Venus stations retrograde on July 22nd. So that's when that 40 days and 40 nights of Venus retrograde begins. But by that time, Mars has already slipped out of Leo into Virgo and sort of escaped the completion of that aspect or of that connection or union between the two. So, what does that mean? I was watching a live stream of Nick Diggin-Best and Patrick Watson are doing live streams now pretty frequently. I think a couple times a week on Nick's
Yeah, I need to
YouTube
catch up
channel,
with
which you
theirs.
should check out and subscribe
They-
to. And Patrick,
They're awesome. I actually want to learn this system that I think it's the other guy, I forgot his name, Nick or Dragon or whatever his name is. Not the other guy that he does a lot of it. He's a Leo. He talks about the Venus synod cycle. It's very complicated, but it actually is being used to sort of study historical significance and authority figures, especially with like presidents and just significant standpoints. And he's using it for the presidents of the United States. But it's actually very complicated, and I had to like watch his explanation of it so many times because it was so. It's very high, like it's an ancient technique, so it is very complicated. So I realized that my knowledge of astrology is so limited because there's so many other cycles I could learn. It's like endless, y'all. Like there's literally no end to learning. Which does don't get me wrong, it doesn't actually discourage me. It actually makes me happy. It just goes to show how expansive astrology is and how much and how much it's really developed over the years. And me being part of it is really it literally scratches the itch that my Gemini Mars and my natal Gemini Mars and my Sagittarius opposition can kind of like learn together. Except just memorizing and learning is gonna take me years, but I'm okay with that because I'm a forever learner. So
was talking about how in horary, usually that's a specific type of thing when a faster planet is applying to an exact aspect with another planet, but then the second planet escapes and moves into the next sign, that it's usually indicative of something that's forming that seems like it's about to happen, but then it doesn't quite come together in the horary question. And we almost have like a broader, like mundane version of that here with the union of Venus and Mars seeming like it's impending, but then losing that or that being aborted in some sense at the last minute.
Yeah. Well, it's like the yeah, it's interesting because the literal motion is it looks like Venus is chasing Mars and narrowing the distance, but she just gets slower and slower and slower. And like if you looked at it at most points, be like, oh well, she's gonna catch him, right?
Right. She
But
she
then it
wants
seems
to get to it.
yeah, and then eventually it's like, oh, I need to go back, and then we get a separation. And so
Right.
yeah, it's interesting to think of what is what is the thing that looks like it's going to come to completion that doesn't, right? There's that side of it, but then there's also it's two planets close together in the same sign transiting the same house in the natal chart. You're going to get a lot of Venus Mars fun and drama being generated through June and then into July. Like there's just there's a lot of they still live in the same apartment, right? They're still like sharing the same bathroom. There's lots of interaction. There just isn't that moment of union.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah.
So
So
it's on just one level, like on a personal level, right? This is hugely actually Venus Mars in Leo, leading into a Venus retrograde. It's the potential for dramatizing things, making
Mm.
relationships and moments of relating more dramatic than maybe they need to be, like a little bit more
Yeah.
spotlit and covered in glitter and fire. Like there's gonna be we need to I think it would be
I
wise,
think we should
especially if
like
you've got fixed anything, especially relational planets, to just kind of
it just
watch the
bothers
drama
me.
because the natural tendency is very dramatic. It's very bright. Like I don't know as I've been thinking about like how do we what does Venus Mars in Leo look like? Like it's very drag. It's very over the top, right? It's not just appearing, right? It's over the top, like pushing. I should say like pushing appearance um, to make as much of an impact
Oh,
as possible,
that's what
right?
it
This
is
is the
now.
sign of the
I totally
sun,
messed up
and
my
the sun is all
design.
about seeing and what's visible, and if that's operating on a, let's say, unconscious or semi-conscious
Yeah, this
level,
was a really hard
being
design to do. I
pushed
don't know what I was
to
thinking.
dramatize things can be a problem, right? Sometimes you have to make something a problem big to see it and address it, and then sometimes that just makes it way worse. But this is just it's very dramatic, and in terms of psychology, thinking like what is this what is this about, like what kind of triggers are there going to be for these episodes, the different episodes in the dramatic series. It's ego issues and like feeling seen, like I don't feel seen, or you see me incorrectly, um, or I don't feel valued, right? It's this kind of stuff, like in relationship when we're dealing with Leo, right? Because it's about that seeing, or not being seen.
yeah, and the desire to be recognized and to be centralized or treated as central, and the tensions that come when that's not happening.
Yeah, one, and we get yeah when we when we need to be seen for something and we're not seen, we get like angry or resentful, or you also there's just like all of those sort of dynamics, which all of that is should I say it seems to me very present on social media. There's a
Oh
whole lot
yeah.
of fighting for the spotlight, and envy over a person who's getting more, and oh, but I'm doing this and this, intentional like spotlight games where people are competing and also arranging the spotlight so certain things are visible. And speaking of visible, Venus retrogrades always deliver sexual scandal. I expect lots and lots. I expect a double dose of Escandalo during not just the Venus retrograde, but the lead up as well.
Mm-hmm.
The stage is set.
The stage
Well,
set.
especially
Yeah.
with celebs, like
Oh
this
yeah.
Leo energy is giving me like
I feel like a lot of people are gonna break up.
scandal. Yeah.
Yeah, they love scandals.
In
Leos love it.
coordinating Venus
Just
Mars
kidding. Not all Leos do.
Firmicus is absolutely relentless in talking about scandal. It's just like scandal, 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 scandal.
Right. You had an example, or I don't know, you were use that in your workshop, Austin, on okay. So
The particular Venus Mars
I love how he does that. He's like, I am.
blameworthy in sexual manners, and their indecency will be publicly exposed.
got it. Yeah, so that's Firmicus, and then this Venus retrograde, and since it's a retrograde, it also invokes the past, and it brings up Venus's synodic cycle, where Venus goes retrograde in the same spot of the zodiac approximately every 8 years. So this is going to tie us back into a retrograde and a time period in some people's lives that happened 8 years ago this summer, where Venus went retrograde in roughly the same area of the zodiac back in the summer of 2015, or even 8 years before that, when Venus went retrograde in roughly the same area of the zodiac in the summer of 2007. So for some people, it will be either looking back to some events that happened in your life back during those two time frames, or other previous time frames in 8-year increments prior to that, or in some instances bringing up and having you revisit things that were started at that time and having to return to them, or having to go back and complete something perhaps that was left unfinished.
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about this for my age group, the people turning 32 this year, because a lot of my friends, a lot of people I grew up with were born under this cycle. And I think, yeah, June, July 91, we had a Venus Mars conjunction in Leo. We also had Jupiter there too. It's interesting now we have the Jupiter square. But yeah, just thinking a lot about being born under this star point basically, and how it should be an interesting summer for a lot of us, just personally even. But yeah, I think actually the one in 2015, where was Jupiter? Wasn't Jupiter in Leo too for that one?
That was the one I always
Yeah.
associate that
It's so
retrograde.
beautiful because we could see it.
Yeah, well, and that was the one where in the United States it was really notable because the Venus Jupiter conjunction Leo was forming, and the Supreme Court at that time ended up effectively legalizing same-sex marriage. And I always remember it for that we had a Venus Jupiter conjunction in the sky, and you had such an amazing sort of positive like correlation happening at the same time. So I'm curious what that looks like when instead this summer it's like you have a Venus Mars conjunction that's forming in the sky, and Venus goes retrograde, and that's a little bit more, that's much more like challenging and much more tricky in terms of Venus's significations compared to a Venus Jupiter conjunction.
I think we had another Venus Mars conjunction 2 years ago in Leo. Summer of 2021, I remember that one too. So that might be a nice callback as well. Thinking what happened July 2021.
Chart up for that. Yeah, there it is.
I remember because I was dating someone that has the exact Venus Jupiter Mars conjunction in Leo, and I was visiting him around that time.
Oh yeah. Here is. I remember that because I remember this triple conjunction where the moon like caught up to Venus and Mars at the same time, and it was tricky because there was also the opposition from Saturn at 11 degrees of Aquarius, and this was like that first summer after the 2020 COVID summer, where it's kind of like that was a pretty, 2020 summer was pretty tricky. And 2021 was the first one where things were open again, and yeah, a lot of it was centered on that Venus Mars conjunction.
Those again.
Yeah, so let's talk about that because that's throwing in a interesting twist to this, as well as Venus's ingress into Leo at the very beginning of the month. It's not a clean ingress because as soon as it moves into Leo, it immediately opposes Pluto, which is at 0 degrees of Aquarius, and then Venus moves into a square with Saturn or with Jupiter, which it completes around June 11th. So Venus is like moving into is filling out that T square that previously Mars occupied when it moved into Leo and hit Jupiter and Pluto this month in May. So that's kind of a rough ingress with the Venus Pluto opposition, which can sometimes, through nature of an opposition in and of itself, manifest in relational dynamics and components, but sometimes with extreme tensions of like either obsession or of issues of control or manipulation or power struggles or things like that in interpersonal dynamics.
Alright, that's good enough.
Yeah, but we're also running into the nodes too. That Venus creating that opposition with Pluto, but right after that, running into the bendings, basically the squaring the nodes. And yeah, I've been thinking a lot about these ingresses these fixed ingresses, like even with the moon, that hit the nodes and Pluto, and how disorienting and kind
We're
of
gonna do a different design this way.
existential it can feel.
A lot easier one.
And I think with this one with Venus, it's especially, people ruled by Venus, I think are really going to feel that shift and the kind of confusion that happens when a planet runs into the bendings.
My Venus friend, my
Yeah, I think that. I was. Yeah, confusion is very good and will be a very operative word. Like the drama, like the potential for drama again really starts early. Like you don't have to wait for Venus to stay in retrograde for the drama to begin. Because Venus is just, like the push pull from the nodes, right? Like in that exact square, the bendings. It's, the north node says do more, the south node says let, or south node says less, north node says hold on tighter, south node says let it go, and in a sense they're advocating for the opposite thing. Like you cannot hold tighter and let go at the same time.
Oh wait, no, let's do it this way. It needs to be two different things. I forgot.
Two hands, one can be letting
That
go
looks
and one
weird.
can be holding on, but to hold on with both hands, you can't let go at the same time.
I feel like this is like for me. I have Venus at the bendings natally.
Okay.
I'm like, okay, yeah, I can take this. It's therapy for me.
Yeah, it's I don't know. Maybe describing it is helpful. Maybe it's just the walls of the prison. I have my moon is in the degree of the bendings, and Venus my ascendant, so that's eternal. The eternal struggle is real. At least one lifetime's worth. But yeah, it's like that, and then there's Pluto, and but there's Jupiter, and that's nice. But then are we conjoining Mars or not? Like, the lead in to retrograde, especially Venus retrograde, it really you start wondering what's going on. And with Venus, a lot of times it's with relationships. There's like a very natural sort of accumulation of questions. Like, oh, I just kind of we got into this groove, and this is what we're doing, but is this? Do we have to do this? Do I like this? I think I like this, but maybe I'd rather do something else. Maybe there are things I don't like about this, and you get like the sort of contradictions start piling up as you get closer to the retrograde, and that's the ultimately useful and necessary parts of Venus retrogrades is really audit all of those contradictions that have built up in relationships and reassess rather than like, oh, it's the way we do things and it works well enough, right? Just like Mercury needs to go back and like check back and answer old emails. You can't just proceed forward forever. But with Venus, it's hardier, and so it's the same ambivalence
Oh,
and the back
I
and
did it wrong.
forth that you feel about things.
That's
It's
how I
not
was
a back and
confused.
forth about information. It's about
It's like, why
the
is it like that?
status of relationship and how do you feel about this person and how do they feel about you and what do you call that connection and is it the same or is it changing and do I like how it's like all that stuff. And so one piece of advice that I give myself and other people in a lead up to a Venus retrograde, especially one that's one of those that hits your chart, is the holding space for that back and forth and that ambivalence, because the retrograde exists to take you all the way through it and out with a clarity on the other side. Trying to get the answer 6 weeks early almost never works because you're not actually done with the process yet.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and
Yeah.
thinking about that confusion, especially with the ingress, with that Pluto opposition feels so compulsive and like
Mm.
I just keep wanting to tell people, like with Mars too, Mars
Wait, let's
retrograde
do
and
this.
is there right now. Trying not
Mm.
to just be compulsive and like, feeling like you have to act or make a decision right away because like, yeah, give it a couple days, basically.
Yeah,
I,
Mars definitely always helps or throws in this impulsive quality, and Pluto also having that compulsive or obsessive quality kind of magnifies that.
yeah, I like compulsive for Pluto.
Yeah, it's very. I have to do this now, or else the world's gonna end.
No, I have to.
Yeah, it's. I have some Mars Pluto conjunction, so I am so familiar with that feeling, and I know when it's coming up. But yeah, it just gets so like, no, you don't understand. The world is going to end. I don't do this thing right now. But of course, it hasn't ended yet. So
Well,
Right,
it's
or that
only
that
because you've done the thing every
I
time.
did the thing. Yeah.
well, and sometimes with it's a Venus Pluto alignment, the feeling is like, no, I have to do this. I have to be with this person, or I will literally die right
Yeah.
now. Is like the internal feeling of what's enabling that
Mm.
compulsion. Whether or not you will actually die with or without that person may not be the
Yeah.
case.
I also wanted to note, we talked so much about relationships with Venus, and it's definitely going to be relational, but there's also the creative component here. And, I just keep thinking about this retrograde feeling so much like a creative project that people are going to be working on for like an extended period of time. And just knowing to kind of pace yourself when it comes to that. I'm currently working on an app, and I know that this retrograde is going to be about that for me. And so yeah, just thinking about pacing yourself with the creative process as well.
Yeah, and that if you're involved in like a creative project that extends through these months, be ready for it to take some turns. Like
Right.
I know that I will probably be in, almost certainly be in layout for the second edition of 36 Faces during the Venus retrograde, and so I'm assuming layout, which is literally it's Venus and Leo. It's the visual. It's not the words. It's how the words are put on the page in relationship to the pictures, et cetera, et cetera. I'm definitely giving that the whole Venus retrograde. Like I won't accept that it's done until the Venus retrograde is over. Just let that twist and turn, right? Let it go where it needs to go.
Yeah, and that reminds me of our last Venus retrograde, that Venus retrograde in Capricorn in early part of last year, and there was the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the start of that war, which looked like it was just going to be the Russians kind of steamrolling Ukraine, and that was their expectation, evidently. But then it ended up taking like much longer and becoming a much more long and drawn out conflict than I think they anticipated, or maybe than anyone anticipated. And that was also very keyed in with a Venus retrograde.
Yeah, this Mars Venus together with Venus about to station retrograde has a
Excuse
weird
me.
resonance with the signature of the beginning of the war, which was Venus stationing direct after retrograde with Mars. And from what we can see from here, the big Ukrainian offensive is due to begin any moment, which I think is probably what the Mars opposing Pluto and square Jupiter are Macho Man Randy Savage signature that we talked about last month. Um, and this will be this offensive, or whatever it ends up being. This is after the much talked about shipments of new weapons from Western countries. Like they haven't really used those; they've been training on them, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to get to see, and again, quite dramatic, right? If we're talking about drama, with Mars involved. We'll get to see what all that is over this Mars Venus time. I think it will. Yes, it will probably be quite over the top in the results. It's going to not be. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, and as we've talked about in the past, it's like the Ukraine independence chart, the birth chart of Ukraine has Venus retrograde at 28 Leo,
What's my Bubby
and
doing?
Zelensky
I know he's
has
messing up my
Saturn
house,
at
but
28 Leo
what are you
retrograde.
doing,
So
Bubbies?
there's some major
What are you doing, Bubbies?
events that are going to be tied in with that Venus retrograde for
Oh, of
both of our
course.
two charts.
Yeah. I would be very surprised if it isn't regarded historically.
I like how they're just all falling.
Critical.
Oh my.
As far as deciding.
Yeah, or turning point. Turning point is a really good keyword because it takes me
He
back to
said
what
it
you were
him
talking about.
messing up my house.
Reflection.
It's okay. We'll
Is
fix it
that
later.
when we reach a critical turning point in our life, what a turning point is it's like a pivot where you come up and there's like a U-turn or there's like a
Okay.
roundabout in a way that you hit, and that for a little while you have this feeling of not moving forward and slowing down and being sort of like stuck in place at a crucial moment in time.
I was just wondering. I mean, you do
Slowing down,
whatever,
pivoting,
even though this is
maneuvering
my
what's going on
build,
in your
but I'm
life,
not gonna stop you.
opens up
He
an
always
opportunity
messes up my
for
build, so
reflection
it's just
and for looking
kind of
back
used
at
to
the
it now.
past and deciding how you want to move forward in the future, and if you want to stay on the same trajectory or if
Sorry,
you
I've.
want to reconfigure or change something about your current trajectory, whether it's with relationships, whether it's your professional life. It kind of depends what area of your chart Venus is going retrograde in. But that process of hitting a pivot point or a turning point allows for the reflection. It gives room for a period of reflection.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and an actual pivot or change of direction on a deeper and more enduring level for a person, requires some inside yourself to actually change direction, not just like a superficial sort of, well, I'm going to do this now, but to change your orientation, right? To switch your trajectory from southeast to north or whatever. That requires that kind of change requires isolation and isolation and what is the word, solitude of some sort. Just like Venus will be invisibly with the sun, right? Part of the retrograde of Venus is that Venus disappears from both the western and eastern horizons for a period of time.
Yeah,
Hmm.
kind of thinking about those Venus ruled houses in your chart and how they're symbolically kind of going into the underworld in a way or disappearing for this period of time in order for this shift to happen. Because I feel like a lot of people pay attention to the house that it's happening in, but those houses that Venus rules really, that's what's coming up for review and revision, I guess.
Finally got it done.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. All right, so let's see. Other things happening. As we said, we got that full moon on the 3rd in Sagittarius. Are there any other things we want to say about that? I know around the same time that Mercury conjoins Uranus on June 4th. So that's interesting because it's kind of like completing an aspect from when Mercury stationed retrograde conjunct Uranus weeks earlier. And sometimes there can be like the pace of communications can suddenly and unexpectedly quicken and start moving a lot faster. So
All right.
having that coincide with a full moon in Sagittarius in and of itself
All right,
is sort
I
of a
think we're ready
doubling
to.
up of like a similar set of significations.
That and it's like the moon being ruled by Jupiter on the north node too. Plus, yeah, the sun being ruled by Uranus. It's like that feels so hectic and intense, and we don't get any light from benefics with this moon. They're both reversed to the full moon, so yeah, I'm really like, what is this energy because it just feels so like ungrounded to me.
Hmm.
That's a really good point.
I would say it's looking to Jupiter in an Earth sign, but like it doesn't have an angle on it.
Yeah.
See,
Yeah.
and now I'm terrified
a punk.
that my
All right.
my plans to actually relax after Norwalk are going to be ruined. Right? Because
Oh
the better is to just
no.
relax and party. Right? It's a Jupiter ruled full moon. Jupiter's in Taurus, but there's other stuff going on, right? And there's specifically Mercury with Uranus, which you also point out rules the sun. Right? So
Unfortunately,
there's like surprise.
Yeah,
Unfortunately,
it's like too much
it-
caffeine or
the-
something like that. It's like too much of a dose. Of something. You can't settle down.
unfortunately, I will not be able to go to this. There is astrology pod like events, but they're really expensive to go to, and I literally can't. I don't have money, so maybe one day, we can go. You have to also pay for like the pot, like because they'll record classes for you to go to, but I just can't. All right, well, we only got a few minutes left. Let's see how much longer. This podcast is really long. It's like I thought it was going to be about 2 hours. But yeah, this one's pretty long. I don't know if I can listen for another. Like I'm getting sleepy. Like I'm only paying attention to some of the things, and it's like, okay, now I'm just kind of getting tired. So, let's see. I'm gonna write down what time frame we're at because I think this is a good place to stop with the podcast. But I'm not gonna stop the stream. I'm getting sleepy, but I'm not stopping the stream. I'm still gonna. Quinn, why are you putting water everywhere, you punk?